Hello, this is Coach Stanley welcoming you to today's presentation of our skills training. We are continuing with theoretical draws, a continuation from last time's presentation where we looked at one side having an advantage of a pawn plus a bishop, which ordinarily is supposed to win, but that is only if the pawn belongs to the B, C, D, E, F, or G files. The exception with the A and H file, as we saw, if the bishop is of opposite color to the promoting square, the defending side is able to secure a draw. Getting back to the position we have before us, from beginner's chess, we already know that if a pawn matches is the smallest unit on the chessboard, if he's allowed to promote, then he can decide the fate of the game by promoting to either a rook or queen and winning. However, if the opposing king is in front of the pawn, with the knowledge that the king can both block the pawn and use its king to king opposition to restrict the king escorting the pawn, then this is yet another theoretically drawn position, and the game would proceed something like this. The pawn moves to d4, the black king retreats, because if the pawn advances again it will be captured. The white king advances to escort and support the pawn, then the black king uses opposition. The pawn advances, it's once again blocked. The white king supports the pawn and the black king retreats. If the pawn advances right away, it will be captured. So the white king has to escort and support it. Opposition comes into play. Pawn advances, it's blocked. King retreats with the possibility of capturing it. The white king continues supporting. Opposition comes into play, and then we have the final check through the advance of the pawn, which is subsequently blocked by the black king. And now white is only left with two options. The first one is that obviously if the king moves away from the pawn, the black king will simply capture the pawn and that will be a draw. While the second option is for the king to continue doing what it has done all the time, to support the pawn, and it can only do that from d6. And after playing king d6, that's a stalemate, yet another draw, confirming that the position was theoretically drawn from the point we started from. The position we have before us, we see that white has an advancing passed pawn. Black has the knight, which is worth more than the pawn, but the knight alone cannot checkmate, and so it's not winning material. Whilst white can win this game if he manages to promote the pawn. The other thing is that the black king, being a slow moving piece, will not be able to advance and catch up with the pawn. So the only hope for black is to use the knight and try and sacrifice it on the pawn so that we can at least secure a draw. Now, this position would advance as follows. Yes, the white king starts going towards the pawn to escort it and takes the direction of the right-hand side of the board in order to try and restrict the black knight at the same time. So the knight comes in with a check. White king attacks the knight. The knight jumps, going to threaten the pawn. It moves away from the attack. Then the black king also tries to close in to give support. White king goes to attack the knight. The knight blocks the pawn. The knight is once again attacked. Knight check on the white king. And king goes to attack the knight, securing this square for the advance of the pawn at the same time. The knight jumps with a check. King goes to attack the knight, still securing the square for its pawn. Knight moves. King attacks the knight. And now this time the knight can only move to a square which will allow the pawn to advance. Knight goes to give a check. King moves away. The black king tries to close in, and the pawn moves, thereby remaining with only one square before it promotes the critical position. Black king closes in. The white king tries to maneuver around. Knight gives a check. King goes to attack the knight. Knight jumps, giving another check, whilst keeping an eye on the promoting square, this one. The king goes to attack the knight. He guards the promoting square. The knight is attacked again, and he gives a check. Now, this theoretical draw is as a result of the octopus behavior of the knight, something that we already know, that the knight controls 8 squares around him. So because of this control of 8 squares around him, he will be able to attack the king and keep an eye on that square, so that should the pawn advance, then the knight will just sacrifice himself, resulting into a draw as a result of bare kings. That concludes our skills presentation on theoretically drawn positions. Thank you.